He was just another street performer, playing music for strangers. But one decision changed everything. After giving away his last earnings to a hospital, he never expected a miracle. Then, the next day, a fleet of luxury cars appeared in front of him. What followed was a story the world would never forget. Stay till the end to witness an act of kindness that turned into something extraordinary. Subscribe to Seeds of Goodness to see how generosity can change lives. On a busy street corner in New York City, where the sounds of honking cars and hurried footsteps filled the air, a lone musician played his guitar. His name was Elijah Carter, a black street musician in his mid-40s, known for his deep, soulful voice and the passion he poured into every note. He wasn't famous, nor did he dream of stardom. His only goal was to make people feel something through his music. Elijah had been playing on the same street corner for over a decade. With a worn-out guitar, a simple amplifier, and a hat placed on the ground for tips, he entertained passers-by with classic blues, jazz, and heartfelt originals. Life was never easy for him. Some days he barely made enough to buy food, but no matter what, he always played. The music was his refuge, his way of surviving in a world that often ignored people like him. One evening, as the sun set behind the towering skyscrapers, Elijah finished his set and leaned back against the brick wall behind him. He opened his phone and scrolled through the news, his eyes catching a heartbreaking headline: Children's Hospital in Crisis, Urgent Need for Funding to Save Lives. A local hospital, known for treating children with rare and severe illnesses, was struggling to stay open. The article explained that without donations, many young patients would be left without proper medical care. The thought weighed heavily on Elijah. He had been through hard times himself. Growing up in a rough neighborhood, he knew what it meant to struggle, to feel forgotten. But the idea of children suffering due to a lack of money, it struck a chord deep in his heart. That night, as he lay on his thin mattress in his tiny rented room, he couldn't shake the thought. He had barely enough for himself, yet he knew he had to do something. The next morning, Elijah made a decision that shocked even himself. Instead of pocketing his earnings from the week, he gathered every single dollar he had made, around $482, and walked to the children's hospital. Inside, he approached the front desk, his calloused hands clutching the envelope of money. A young nurse looked up at him, puzzled. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked politely. Elijah hesitated, then smiled. "I don't have much," he said, placing the envelope on the counter. "But I hope this can help the kids. They need it more than I do." The nurse was taken aback. "Are you sure? This is very generous." Elijah nodded. "Yeah, music has given me everything, but these kids need hope more than a song." She quickly called a hospital administrator, who came out and shook Elijah's hand, visibly moved. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "This means more than you know." One of the nurses, touched by Elijah's selfless act, pulled out her phone and recorded a short video of him explaining why he donated. She uploaded it to social media with the caption, "A street musician donates his last earnings to save children's lives. If only the world had more people like him." Elijah left the hospital that day, thinking nothing more of it. He had done what he could, and that was enough for him. But the world had other plans. Within hours, his story would spread like wildfire, reaching places and people he never could have imagined. That evening, Elijah returned to his usual street corner, setting up his guitar as he always did. The night was colder than usual, and fewer people were out. He strummed a slow blues melody, the notes echoing between the towering buildings. He wasn't expecting anything in return for his donation. He never gave with the expectation of receiving. Meanwhile, across the city, something remarkable was happening. The video of Elijah's donation, posted by the nurse, began to spread across social media. At first, it gained modest attention. Local news outlets shared it, praising his generosity. But within hours, the post exploded. Influencers, celebrities, and thousands of strangers reposted it, touched by the sincerity of a man who had so little yet gave so much. This man is a real-life angel. If he can give away everything he has, what's stopping the rest of us? Somebody needs to find this musician and make sure he gets the recognition he deserves. As the story spread, people began searching for Elijah. Journalists started calling the hospital, asking about the mysterious musician. News channels featured the clip with headlines like, "Street musician's selfless act sparks nationwide movement." By midnight, the video had reached over 5 million views on Twitter and TikTok. But the most unexpected reactions came from people Elijah had never met, celebrities, athletes, and billionaires who were deeply moved by his actions. The next morning, Elijah woke up to an unusual sight. His phone was buzzing with notifications. Confused, he unlocked it and found hundreds of messages and missed calls. He scrolled through them, bewildered by the flood of responses. Then his phone rang again, an unknown number. "Hello?" he answered hesitantly. "Is this Elijah Carter?" a smooth voice asked. Yeah. Who's asking?" "My name is James Reynolds. I represent a group of entertainers and business people who saw your video, and we want to do something special to honor your kindness. Can you meet us this afternoon?" Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. I guess. Where?" "We'll send you the details. Trust me, Elijah, this is something you don't want to miss." Before he could ask more questions, the call ended. As Elijah packed up his guitar and walked toward the subway, he noticed something strange. People were staring at him. A few even pointed, whispering to one another. Then, a woman ran up to him, breathless. "Oh my God, are you the musician from the video?" I guess so," he said awkwardly. She grinned and pulled out her phone. "Can I take a picture with you? You're a hero." Before Elijah could respond, more people gathered around. Some clapped, others patted his back, thanking him for his generosity. A stranger handed him a $100 bill, insisting he take it. "I don't," he began, but the person just shook their head. "You deserve it, man." Elijah had never been famous. He had spent years playing music on the streets, ignored by most. Now, suddenly, the whole world seemed to be watching him, and he had no idea what was coming next. Elijah spent the rest of the morning in disbelief. Strangers continued to recognize him, shaking his hand and thanking him for his kindness. Some even left money at his feet as he played, something that had never happened before. He still didn't quite understand what was happening until he arrived at the cafe where he had been invited for a meeting. As he pushed open the door, he was met with the sight of cameras, reporters, and a small group of well-dressed individuals waiting for him. A tall man in a navy blue suit approached him with a warm smile. "Elijah, my name is James Reynolds," he introduced himself, shaking his hand firmly. "I represent a group of people who were inspired by your generosity. We wanted to meet you in person." Elijah shifted uncomfortably. "I don't understand. I just did what felt right. I'm not looking for attention," James chuckled. "That's exactly why this is so powerful. You didn't do it for fame. You did it because you care." One of the reporters stepped forward. "Elijah, the video of your donation has gone viral worldwide. Over 50 million people have seen it in just a day. Celebrities, athletes, and philanthropists are talking about you. They want to help." Elijah blinked, still processing the weight of it all. "Help? How?" James smiled. "You'll see." James led Elijah outside, where a black SUV was waiting. Confused but intrigued, Elijah got in. The drive took him through the bustling city streets until they reached a private event venue. When Elijah stepped out of the car, his breath caught in his throat. In front of him was a massive convoy of luxury cars, limousines, and SUVs stretching for nearly 2 kilometers down the street. Camera crews were everywhere, and a large crowd had gathered. Elijah turned to James, wide-eyed. "What is this?" James grinned. "This is for you." As they walked toward the main stage set up at the venue, Elijah began recognizing faces. Actors, musicians, sports legends, tech billionaires. Some of the biggest names in the world had shown up. Standing at the center was Michael Jordan, who stepped forward and shook Elijah's hand. "Man, what you did was incredible," he said sincerely. "You gave everything you had for those kids. We're here to give back to you." Elijah's heart pounded. This couldn't be real. One by one, celebrities stepped forward, announcing their donations to the Children's Hospital in honor of Elijah's act of kindness. Beyoncé and Jay-Z donated $1 million to the hospital. Elon Musk pledged to cover the hospital's operational costs for the next 5 years. LeBron James promised to fund music scholarships for underprivileged children, in Elijah's name. Taylor Swift invited Elijah to perform at one of her concerts. The crowd erupted into cheers with each announcement. Elijah stood frozen, tears forming in his eyes. This was beyond anything he had ever imagined. James placed a hand on his shoulder. And that's not all. He gestured toward a large screen that had been set up behind them. The screen flickered to life, showing a message from an influential record label executive. Elijah Carter, we have seen your story and your talent. We would be honored to offer you a full recording contract. The world deserves to hear your music. The audience erupted in applause. Elijah felt his knees weaken. This was unreal. Just 2 days ago, he had been playing music on a street corner, barely making ends meet. And now, his life had changed forever. Elijah stood frozen on the stage, his heart pounding as the applause echoed around him. He gripped the microphone, his hands slightly shaking. Never in his life had he imagined standing before a crowd of thousands, let alone being honored by some of the biggest names in the world. The cheers eventually died down, and the crowd waited for him to speak. Elijah swallowed hard, his throat dry. He took a deep breath and finally found his voice. I don't even know what to say, he began, his voice thick with emotion. I never did any of this expecting anything in return. I just saw those kids in need and did what I could. I never thought it would lead to all of this. He glanced around at the crowd, then at the large screen behind him displaying his story. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Man, this is crazy. The audience laughed with him, but many wiped away tears, touched by his humility. Elijah looked down at his worn-out guitar, the same one he had played for years on the streets. He traced the scratches on its body, each one a mark of the struggles he had faced. When I first picked up this guitar, I was just a kid in a tough neighborhood, he said, his voice steady now. Music was my escape. It was the one thing that made me feel like I mattered. He looked out at the crowd, his gaze landing on the children from the hospital, some of whom had been brought to the event. They waved at him with wide, excited eyes. But this, he continued, motioning toward them, this is what really matters. These kids deserve hope. They deserve a future. If my small act of kindness helped bring them that, then that's the greatest thing I could ever ask for. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Play us something, Elijah!" The crowd erupted in agreement, cheering for him to perform. Elijah hesitated. He had played for years on the streets, but now, in front of thousands, including some of the most famous musicians in the world, it felt different. Then he heard a voice behind him. You don't have to do it alone. He turned around to see Alicia Keys stepping forward, smiling warmly. Mind if I join you? Elijah let out a breathy laugh, shaking his head in disbelief. Man, this really is crazy. He adjusted his guitar strap and strummed the first few chords of Lean on Me. The moment the familiar melody filled the air, the crowd cheered. Then, Alicia Keys joined in on vocals, her powerful voice harmonizing beautifully with his. Then something even more magical happened. One by one, the other celebrities on stage joined in. Beyoncé, John Legend, and even Ed Sheeran took turns singing lines, turning the performance into a once-in-a-lifetime musical moment. The entire audience sang along, swaying their phone lights in the air. The atmosphere was electric, pure, raw emotion woven into music. As the final note rang out, the applause was deafening. Elijah wiped a tear from his eye, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. James Reynolds stepped forward again, waiting for the applause to die down. Then he pulled out an envelope and handed it to Elijah. "This is for you," he said. Elijah opened it carefully, his eyes widening as he read the document inside. It was a check for $250,000, a personal gift from the group of celebrities who had gathered that night. "You've given so much," James said. "Now it's time for the world to give back to you." Elijah felt his knees buckle slightly, the weight of everything hitting him at once. Just a few days ago, he had been counting his last few dollars, unsure of how he would make rent. Now, he had enough to not only take care of himself, but to continue giving back in even bigger ways. Tears welled in his eyes as he looked out at the sea of faces, all there because of one small act of kindness. He had given everything he had to help others, and now, the universe had answered in a way he never could have imagined. As the event came to a close, Elijah sat backstage, still trying to process everything. His hands trembled as he held the check, staring at the number. $250,000. A fortune for someone who had spent years scraping by on street performances. James Reynolds sat down next to him, a knowing smile on his face. How do you feel? Elijah let out a deep breath, like I'm dreaming. James chuckled. Well, this is just the beginning. Elijah looked at him, confused. What do you mean? James leaned forward. Elijah, your story has inspired millions. People aren't just talking about what you did. They want to support you. I've been getting calls from record labels, music producers, and even film studios wanting to make a documentary about your journey. Elijah raised an eyebrow. A documentary about me? James nodded. You're no longer just a street musician, Elijah. You're a symbol of kindness, of selflessness. People want to hear your music, hear your story. Elijah sat back, overwhelmed. The idea of fame had never crossed his mind. He had always played for the love of music, not for recognition. But now, he had a platform, a chance to do something bigger. Later that evening, before leaving the venue, Elijah asked if he could visit the children's hospital again. When he arrived, the nurses and doctors greeted him with warm smiles. But the real joy came from the kids. The moment he stepped inside, they erupted in cheers. Some of them had watched the event on TV, and they were beyond excited to see him. One little girl, no older than 6, ran up to him and hugged his leg. Thank you for helping us, she whispered. Elijah's heart clenched. He knelt down, looking her in the eyes. You're the real heroes, he said softly. You keep fighting, okay? She nodded, beaming. Then Elijah did what he did best. He played his guitar. This time he wasn't on a cold street corner singing for strangers. He was in a warm, bright hospital room playing for the children who had inspired him to give in the first place. And for the first time in his life, he felt truly fulfilled. A full year had passed since that fateful day when Elijah made his small donation. But now, his life was unrecognizable. He had released his first album, a mix of soulful ballads and blues songs inspired by his time on the streets. It had topped the charts, shocking the music industry. Critics called his music raw, heartfelt, and deeply human. He had performed on some of the biggest stages in the world, including a special performance at the Grammys, where he dedicated a song to the Children's Hospital. And most importantly, he had created a foundation to help struggling musicians and provide funding for children's health care. But despite all the fame and success, Elijah remained the same. He still carried his old, beaten guitar. He still played music not for the money, but for the joy it brought people. One day, as he walked through the same streets where he used to perform, he noticed a young boy playing the guitar in the exact spot he used to stand. The boy was no older than 12, his fingers fumbling over the chords. Elijah smiled and knelt beside him. Need some help? He asked. The boy's eyes widened as he recognized him. You're Elijah Carter, he gasped. Elijah chuckled. That's what they tell me. He adjusted the boy's grip on the guitar and strummed a few chords. Keep practicing, he said. Music can take you places you never imagined. The boy beamed. Like you? Elijah smiled, thinking back to the incredible journey he had been on. Yeah, he said softly. Exactly like me. As he walked away, he glanced back one last time. The boy was still playing, his confidence growing. And Elijah knew the cycle of kindness would continue. Because one small act of generosity could change the world in ways no one could ever predict.